Millionaire pays homeless woman to have his child. But moments before the baby is born, she reveals a secret that made him cry. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. In the winter of 1983, a biting cold settled over Boston, Massachusetts. Maxwell Bradford sat in his gleaming Cadillac Seville, drumming his fingers against the leather steering wheel as he stared at the fertility clinic's entrance. Another failed attempt. At 45, his quest for an heir to his real estate empire seemed increasingly futile. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. "Mr. Bradford, your condition makes it virtually impossible to father a child naturally." Maxwell's jaw clenched. Impossible wasn't a word he accepted. He'd built his fortune from nothing, transforming abandoned properties into luxury developments. Every obstacle in his life had eventually bent to his will. As he pulled away from the clinic, his attention was drawn to a young woman huddled in a doorway, seeking shelter from the cold. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her clothes worn but clean, her posture suggesting someone who hadn't always lived on the streets. Something about her struck him, perhaps the way she held herself, or how she clutched a tattered paperback book despite her circumstances. Maxwell found himself pulling over, his mind racing with an idea that would have seemed preposterous just moments before. He stepped out of his car, approaching her with the same confidence he carried into business negotiations. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. The woman looked up, revealing striking green eyes that held both wariness and intelligence. "I don't want any trouble," she said, her voice surprisingly refined. "My name is Maxwell Bradford. I have a business proposition for you." She studied him carefully before responding. Patricia Wells. "Would you join me for coffee, Mrs. Wells? I promise you'll want to hear what I have to say." Patricia hesitated, then gathered her few belongings. "There's a diner around the corner. Public place, lots of witnesses," she said with a hint of dark humor that caught Maxwell off guard. Inside the warm diner, over steaming cups of coffee and plates of hot food Patricia couldn't help but devour, Maxwell laid out his proposition. He needed an heir. She needed a chance at a better life. The arrangement would be simple. She would carry his child, receive the best medical care, and in return, he would provide her with a fresh start, an apartment, education, whatever she needed to build a new life. "Why me?" Patricia asked, her green eyes boring into his. "Surely there are more conventional options." Maxwell leaned back, considering his response. "Because when I saw you reading Steinbeck in that doorway, I realized you're not just trying to survive, you're trying to live. That's the kind of spirit I want for my child's mother." Patricia picked up her coffee cup, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. "And after? What happens to me once you have your heir?" "You'll be well compensated, enough to start fresh anywhere you choose. The child would be mine to raise, but you'd be free to build whatever life you want." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "So you want to buy a baby and my disappearance?" "I want to give us both what we need," Maxwell replied, his tone softening slightly. "Think about it. You have my card." As he drove home that evening to his mansion in Beacon Hill, Maxwell couldn't shake the image of Patricia's eyes, the way they flashed with both desperation and dignity. He'd made countless business deals, but none had felt quite like this. 3 days later, his phone rang. "Mr. Bradford, it's Patricia Wells. About your proposition. I have conditions." Maxwell smiled, hearing the strength in her voice. This was no simple transaction for her, and somehow that made him even more certain he'd chosen right. "I'm listening," he said, settling into his leather chair, unaware that this conversation would set in motion events that would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. "First, I want everything in writing. Second, I want to be involved in decisions about the pregnancy. And third," she paused, her voice faltering slightly, "I want to know my child will be loved, not just treated like an heir." Maxwell's grip tightened on the phone. "Come to my office tomorrow, Mrs. Wells. We'll draw up the papers. And Patricia, you have my word. This child will want for nothing, especially not love." As he hung up the phone, Maxwell felt a strange mix of triumph and trepidation. He'd initiated the beginning of his legacy, but something in Patricia's voice, in her conditions, suggested this arrangement might not be as simple as he'd planned. Outside, snow began to fall over Boston, covering the city in a blank white canvas, much like the uncertain future stretching before them both. The following weeks transformed Patricia's life with dizzying speed. Maxwell moved her into a modest but comfortable apartment in Back Bay, arranged for comprehensive medical care, and provided her with new clothes suitable for her appointments. The early spring of 1984 brought not just warmer weather, but a complete metamorphosis of her circumstances. Yet Patricia found herself struggling with the reality of their arrangement. The stark contrast between her past life and present situation was nowhere more apparent than during her first dinner at Maxwell's mansion. She sat at his massive mahogany dining table, wearing a new dress that cost more than she used to make in months, trying to remember which fork to use first. "The doctors say everything looks promising," Maxwell said, cutting into his steak. "Dr. Harrison believes the procedure was successful." Patricia nodded, pushing food around her plate. "The morning sickness suggests they're right." She paused, then added, "I saw something interesting today while I was walking through the public garden." Maxwell looked up, surprise flickering across his features. He wasn't used to her initiating conversation. "Oh, a mother teaching her little girl to feed the ducks. The girl couldn't have been more than 3. Patricia's voice softened. "Cyrus, the mother was so patient, showing her how to break the bread into tiny pieces. It made me think about—" "Ms. Wells," Maxwell interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "Remember our agreement. This isn't that kind of arrangement." Patricia's cheeks flushed. "Of course, I apologize." She returned to her meal, the silence growing thick between them. Later that evening, as his driver took her home, Patricia pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the car window, watching Boston's lights blur past. She thought about her life before the streets, before everything fell apart. The prestigious scholarship to Wellesley College, the future that had seemed so bright, and then her father's illness that drained every penny they had. One semester away from graduating, she'd been forced to drop out, watching her dreams crumble alongside her father's health. The pregnancy was confirmed a week later. Maxwell's satisfaction was evident in the way he immediately began preparations, converting a room in his mansion into a nursery and hiring the city's best designers. Patricia observed these developments with a mixture of awe and unease during her required weekly visits to the house. One such afternoon, while Maxwell was stuck in a business meeting, Patricia found herself wandering the massive house. In a study lined with leather-bound books, she discovered a photograph that made her pause. A much younger Maxwell stood beside a beautiful woman in a wedding dress, both beaming at the camera. Patricia had never heard him mention a wife. "That was taken a lifetime ago." Maxwell's voice came from behind her, making her jump. She hadn't heard him enter. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been snooping," Patricia said, quickly setting down the photograph. Maxwell stepped closer, picking up the frame. "Her name was Elizabeth. We were married for 3 years before the accident." His voice carried a weight Patricia had never heard before. "The doctors said the trauma made it impossible for me to— Well, that's why we're here, isn't it?" Patricia studied his face, seeing for the first time the pain he usually kept hidden behind his businessman's mask. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You never mentioned—" "There's a lot we don't mention, Mrs. Wells," he replied, replacing the photograph. "That's the nature of our arrangement." But the moment had shifted something between them. In the weeks that followed, their interactions began to change subtly. Maxwell started asking about her doctor's appointments instead of just reading the reports. He insisted she join him for dinner twice a week, claiming it was to ensure she was eating properly. Sometimes, he even asked about her walks in the public garden. As her belly grew, Patricia found herself sharing more of her past, her time at Wellesley, her dreams of becoming a writer, her father's battle with cancer. Maxwell listened with increasing interest, occasionally sharing his own stories of building his real estate empire from scratch after Elizabeth's death. The arrangement began to feel less like a business transaction and more like a complex partnership. But with this evolution came complications neither had anticipated. One evening, during their now regular dinner, Patricia noticed Maxwell watching her with an odd expression as she told him about feeling the baby kick for the first time. "Is something wrong?" she asked, self-consciously touching her expanding waistline. Maxwell seemed to catch himself, quickly looking away. "Not at all. Please, continue." But Patricia had caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, something that made her own heart beat faster in a way she knew it shouldn't. This wasn't part of their agreement. This wasn't supposed to be personal. The next day, Patricia received an unexpected visitor at her apartment. A well-dressed woman in her 60s introduced herself as Margaret Bradford, Maxwell's mother. "So you're the young woman carrying my grandchild," Margaret said, her tone impossible to read. "May I come in?" Patricia stepped aside, her mind racing. Maxwell had never mentioned his mother would visit. Margaret Bradford surveyed the apartment with sharp eyes before settling onto the couch. "I'll be direct, my dear. I've had you investigated." Patricia's blood ran cold. "I see. Indeed, your story is quite fascinating, particularly the part about your time at Wellesley." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, does my son know about your connection to Elizabeth?" Patricia's hands began to tremble. The secret she'd been keeping since the moment she recognized Maxwell Bradford's name that day in the diner now threatened to unravel everything. "I don't know what you mean," she managed to say, but Margaret's knowing look told her the lie was useless. "I think you do. The question is, what do you plan to do with this information?" Margaret rose gracefully. "Think carefully, my dear. Maxwell has suffered enough." After Margaret left, Patricia sat in her apartment for hours, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other clutching an old Wellesley yearbook she'd managed to keep through all her hardships. In it, a much younger Elizabeth Bradford smiled up at her from the senior photo section. Elizabeth, who had been her tutor, her friend, her inspiration during that first wonderful year at college. Elizabeth, whose death Patricia had learned about months later, after her own world had already fallen apart. Now she was carrying Maxwell's child, Maxwell, who had no idea she had once known and loved his wife as a friend. The weight of this secret pressed down on her more heavily than her pregnancy. As the baby kicked beneath her palm, Patricia made a decision. She would tell Maxwell the truth, no matter the consequences. But before she could put her plan into action, something happened that would change everything, a discovery that would shake both their worlds to the core. June 1984 arrived with unprecedented heat in Boston. Patricia, now 5 months pregnant, sat in Dr. Harrison's waiting room, anxiously watching the clock. Maxwell was supposed to accompany her to this appointment, the first time he'd offered to do so, but he was already 20 minutes late. The door chimed as a nurse led in an elderly woman who sat directly across from Patricia. The woman's eyes fixed on Patricia's swollen belly, then narrowed with recognition. "You're Max Bradford's girl, aren't you?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of decades working in Boston's upper circles. "I'm Helen Blackwood. I was the Bradford family's housekeeper for 30 years. Patricia's throat tightened. "I'm carrying Mr. Bradford's child." "Yes." Helen's face softened with something like pity. "You know, you looked just like her when she was expecting. Same green eyes, same way of holding yourself. Poor Elizabeth was so excited about the baby." Patricia's heart stopped. "What did you say?" "Oh dear, you didn't know." Helen leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Elizabeth was 3 months pregnant when the accident happened. Maxwell was devastated. Lost both of them in one terrible night. That's what really broke him, you see. Not just losing Elizabeth, but their unborn child too." The room began to spin. Patricia had known about Elizabeth's death, but not about the pregnancy. This new information cast everything in a different light. Maxwell's desperation for an heir, his emotional distance, his mother's suspicious visit. Before Patricia could process this revelation, Maxwell burst through the door, looking harried. "I apologize for being late. Traffic was—" He stopped short, seeing Helen. The color drained from his face. "Hello, Maxwell," Helen said gently. I was just getting to know your friend here. Maxwell's jaw tightened. Helen, I trust you're well. He turned to Patricia. The doctor's ready for us. In the examination room, the tension was palpable. The ultrasound technician chatted cheerfully, pointing out the baby's features on the grainy screen, but Patricia barely heard her. She was too aware of Maxwell standing rigidly beside her, his eyes fixed on the monitor showing their child. Would you like to know the sex? The technician asked. Yes, Maxwell answered immediately. It's a boy. Patricia watched Maxwell's face transform. For a brief moment, his careful mask slipped, revealing raw emotion she'd never seen before. His hand unconsciously moved toward hers but stopped short of touching it. Later, in his car, the silence stretched between them until Patricia couldn't bear it anymore. Why didn't you tell me about Elizabeth's pregnancy? Maxwell's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Helen had no right. I deserve to know. All this time I thought... Patricia's voice cracked. So no wonder your mother hates me. She probably thinks I'm trying to replace them. No one could replace them, Maxwell said sharply, then seemed to regret his tone. That's not what this is about. This arrangement is about moving forward, not dwelling in the past. Is it? Because I'm starting to think it's about recreating something you lost. Maxwell pulled the car over abruptly, turning to face her. What exactly are you suggesting, Ms. Wells? I'm suggesting that I'm carrying more than just your heir. I'm carrying all your hopes of fixing the past, of getting back what was taken from you. But I'm not Elizabeth, Maxwell, and this baby, he's not a replacement for the one you lost. Tears were streaming down her face now, hormones and emotions overwhelming her usual composure. To her surprise, Maxwell reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. The tender gesture shocked them both, and he quickly withdrew his hand. You're right, he said quietly. You're not Elizabeth, but that's not why. He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. The arrangement stands as agreed. Let's not complicate things. But things were already complicated, and about to become more so. When they arrived at Patricia's apartment, a police car was waiting outside. 2 detectives stood at her door. Patricia Wells, one of them asked as they approached. We need to ask you some questions about Richard Montgomery. Patricia froze. She hadn't heard that name in over a year, not since the night that had led to her life on the streets. Maxwell stepped forward protectively. What is this about? Mr. Montgomery was found dead in his office this morning, the detective explained. Miss Wells' name was in his papers, multiple times. Patricia swayed slightly, feeling Maxwell's hand steady her elbow. That's impossible, she whispered. He disappeared. After everything he did, he just disappeared. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside, Maxwell suggested, his businessman's instincts taking over. In Patricia's apartment, the truth began to unspool. Richard Montgomery had been her father's business partner, the man who had embezzled their family's savings, leaving them destitute. He was the reason she'd had to leave college, the reason her father had died without proper medical care, the reason she'd ended up on the streets. We found evidence that he'd been blackmailing several people, the detective continued, including recent threats against you, Ms. Wells. Care to explain why? Patricia looked at Maxwell, then back at the detectives. Because I found proof of what he did. Documents that could have exposed everything, but by then, no one would listen to a homeless girl. And where are these documents now? Hidden, Patricia said quietly. It was the only thing keeping me alive, as long as he thought I might go public someday. Maxwell's face had turned to stone. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Would you have believed me? A homeless woman with wild accusations about one of Boston's most respected businessmen. The detective leaned forward. Mrs. Wells, we need those documents, and we need to know where you were yesterday morning between 9 and 11. She was with me, Maxwell said firmly. At my house. We were discussing arrangements for the baby. Patricia's head snapped up. It was a lie. She'd been alone in her apartment all morning, sick with morning sickness. Maxwell was giving her an alibi she hadn't asked for. After the detectives left, promising to return with more questions, Maxwell turned to her. Tell me everything. No more secrets. But as Patricia prepared to finally unburden herself of all her secrets about Montgomery, About Elizabeth. About everything. A sharp pain ripped through her abdomen, causing her to cry out. Maxwell caught her as she doubled over. "Something's wrong with the baby," she gasped, clutching her stomach. As Maxwell rushed her to the hospital, neither of them could have known that this was just the beginning of a night that would change everything they thought they knew about each other. Emergency room lights cast harsh shadows across Maxwell's face as he paced the hospital corridor, the same hospital where he'd lost Elizabeth and their unborn child 7 years ago. Now history seemed to be playing a cruel joke, forcing him to relive his worst nightmare. Patricia lay in the examination room, monitors beeping steadily around her. The doctors had managed to stop the contractions, but ordered complete bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, the medication making her thoughts fuzzy, she caught fragments of conversation between Maxwell and the doctors. "High-risk pregnancy. I need to monitor. Stress levels must be minimized." Through half-closed eyes, she watched Maxwell's reactions, the tight set of his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He looked exactly as she remembered him from that terrible day at Wellesley, when he'd come to collect Elizabeth's belongings from her dorm room. The memory surfaced like a bubble breaking the water's surface. Patricia had been there, helping Elizabeth pack for a weekend trip. They'd been laughing about something trivial when Elizabeth checked her watch and hurried out, calling over her shoulder, "Don't forget about our study session tomorrow, Pat." Those were the last words Patricia ever heard from her friend. The next morning, instead of their usual study session, the campus was buzzing with the news of the accident. Maxwell had come later that day, his face grey with grief, mechanically collecting Elizabeth's things. He hadn't noticed Patricia then, just another tearful student in the crowd of mourners. Now, 7 years later, he stood at her hospital bedside, unaware that the woman carrying his child had been one of the last people to see his wife alive. "Mr. Bradford," a nurse appeared in the doorway. "There are some detectives here to speak with Ms. Wells." Maxwell's expression hardened. She's in no condition for questioning. But Patricia was already struggling to sit up. "It's okay, Maxwell. I need to tell them. Need to tell you." The medication made her words slur slightly. The detectives entered, their faces grave. "Ms. Wells, we've found some concerning information in Mr. Montgomery's files. There are records of payments made to your account at Wellesley College dating back to 1977. Maxwell's head snapped toward Patricia. "Wellesley?" "It's not what you think," Patricia tried to explain, but the detective continued. "For these payments coincided with information leaks about several prominent Boston families, including the Bradfords. Mr. Montgomery appears to have been paying you for information about Elizabeth Bradford." The room went deathly quiet. Maxwell took a step back from Patricia's bed, his face unreadable. "No," Patricia whispered. "That's not—" He twisted everything. "I never—" "Perhaps you should start from the beginning, Mrs. Wells," one detective suggested. Fighting against the medication's fog, Patricia began to speak. "I met Elizabeth in my freshman year. She was a senior, my peer tutor in English literature. We became friends. Real friends." She looked pleadingly at Maxwell. "She talked about you all the time, how happy she was." "And Montgomery?" Maxwell's voice was ice. "He was my father's business partner. When he found out I was friends with Elizabeth Bradford, he started asking questions. Casual at first, about her schedule, her habits. I didn't realize—" Patricia's voice broke. "I didn't know he was planning anything. I thought he was just being friendly, showing interest in my college life." "The accident," Maxwell said slowly. "Did you—" "No." Patricia's denial was fierce. "I would never have hurt Elizabeth. But Montgomery—" "He used the information I'd innocently shared. He knew when she would be on that road, knew she always took that shortcut when she was running late." Tears streamed down her face. "When I figured it out, months later, I confronted him. That's when he threatened my father's medical care. Said he'd make sure Dad never saw another doctor if I talked." The detectives exchanged glances. "We found evidence suggesting Montgomery tampered with Mrs. Bradford's car, but we need proof of his involvement." "The documents," Patricia said weakly, "the ones I hid, they're not just about the embezzlement. There are letters. records of his plans. He kept everything, like a trophy. A sharp pain shot through her abdomen, making her gasp. The monitors started beeping more rapidly. "That's enough," the nurse intervened. "She needs rest." "One more thing," the detective said. "Ms. Wells, your father's medical records show he was treated at Mass General until his death. Every bill was paid in full by an anonymous donor." Patricia's eyes widened. "What?" But Montgomery said, "It wasn't Montgomery," Maxwell said quietly. "It was me." Everyone turned to stare at him. "I never knew the patient's name," he continued. "Just that Elizabeth had been concerned about a friend's father, had arranged for his care to be covered before the accident. After she died, I continued the payments. It felt like honoring her last wish." Patricia felt the room spinning, not from the medication this time, but from the staggering weight of this revelation. All those years, she'd believed Montgomery's threats, believed her father had died without proper care, when in reality— "Out," the nurse ordered, as Patricia's blood pressure spiked dangerously. "Everyone out, now." As the room cleared, Maxwell lingered in the doorway. His face showed a war of emotions: anger, confusion, grief, and something else Patricia couldn't quite name. "Maxwell," she called weakly. "The baby." He paused. "Rest, Miss Wells. We'll talk when you're stronger." But as he turned to leave, another pain seized Patricia, more intense than before. The monitors erupted in urgent beeping, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Maxwell's face, white with fear, as doctors rushed into the room. In that moment, hanging between consciousness and darkness, Patricia realized that the truth she'd been so afraid to tell had come out in the worst possible way. Now, she might lose everything: the baby, Maxwell's trust, and any chance of redemption for her unwitting role in the tragedy that had shaped both their lives. The medical team worked frantically around her as her awareness faded, their urgent voices becoming distant echoes. Someone was calling her name, and it sounded like Maxwell, but she couldn't be sure. As consciousness slipped away, her last thought was a prayer for the baby, not for the heir to the Bradford fortune, but for the innocent life that had somehow become the center of her world. The steady rhythm of hospital monitors marked time as Patricia slowly regained consciousness. Through the haze, she became aware of someone holding her hand. Opening her eyes, she found Maxwell sitting beside her bed, his face haggard from what appeared to be a sleepless night. "It's the baby," she whispered, fear constricting her throat. "He's fighting," Maxwell replied, his voice rough. The doctors managed to stop the contractions again, but he paused, seeming to gather himself. "They say the next 48 hours are critical." Patricia tried to sit up, but Maxwell's gentle pressure on her shoulder kept her in place. "Don't try to move. Doctor's orders." The events before her blackout came rushing back: the detectives, the revelations, Elizabeth. "Maxwell, I'm so sorry. I should have told you everything from the beginning." He was quiet for a long moment, still holding her hand. "Yes, you should have." His tone wasn't angry, just tired. "But I understand why you didn't." "You do." "I've had time to think, sitting here." He gestured to the chair he'd obviously occupied all night. "About Elizabeth, about you, about everything Montgomery stole from both of us." Patricia felt tears forming in her eyes. "I loved her too, you know. She was my first real friend at Wellesley. When I found out what Montgomery had done with the information I'd shared—" Her voice broke. "The police found the documents," Maxwell said quietly, "early this morning, right where you said they'd be, hidden in your old locker at South Station. Montgomery's confession was there, along with evidence of dozens of other crimes. Then you know I never meant—" "I know," he squeezed her hand. "Elizabeth would have liked that, you know, that you kept fighting, even when everything was taken from you. She always admired people with spirit." A nurse entered to check Patricia's vitals, interrupting their conversation. As the nurse worked, Patricia studied Maxwell's face, seeing him differently now. The hard businessman exterior had cracked, revealing glimpses of the man Elizabeth had loved, the man she'd told Patricia about during their study sessions. After the nurse left, Maxwell spoke again. Why didn't you come to me? After you discovered what Montgomery had done. Patricia gave a bitter laugh that turned into a small groan of pain. The grieving millionaire husband. I was a homeless college dropout. Who would have believed me? I would have, Maxwell said softly. Elizabeth always said you were the most honest person she knew. Fresh tears spilled down Patricia's cheeks. I didn't know about the medical bills. All this time, I thought Montgomery had left my father to die without care. But it was you through Elizabeth. She came to me the day before the accident, Maxwell recalled, his voice distant with memory. Said she had something important to tell me, but wanted to wait until after the weekend. I always wondered. He trailed off, lost in thought. She was going to tell you about the baby, Patricia whispered. She had just found out. That's why she was rushing home that night. She couldn't wait to tell you in person. Maxwell's hand tightened on hers almost painfully before he caught himself and loosened his grip. Sign all these years, I've blamed myself for not insisting she tell me right then. If I had... Stop, Patricia said firmly, surprising them both with her tone. Elizabeth made her own choices. So did I. So did you. We can't change the past, Maxwell. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. No, we can't, but maybe we can stop letting it control our future. Before Patricia could respond, she felt a strong kick from the baby. Instinctively, she placed her free hand on her belly. Maxwell watched the movement with visible longing. Would you like to feel him kick? Patricia offered hesitantly. After a moment's pause, Maxwell reached out, placing his hand where Patricia guided it. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as if knowing his father was finally reaching out to him. Hello, son, Maxwell whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The moment was interrupted by Dr. Harrison entering the room with a concerned expression. Mr. Bradford, Mrs. Wells, we need to discuss the situation. The medication we're using to prevent premature labor has serious side effects. We need to consider all options. As the doctor explained the risks and possibilities, Patricia felt Maxwell's hand slip back into hers, offering silent support. Whatever happened next, something fundamental had shifted between them. That evening, as summer rain pattered against the hospital windows, Patricia drifted in and out of sleep. Each time she opened her eyes, Maxwell was there, sometimes working on papers, sometimes just watching her and the monitors with equal attention. During one wakeful period, she found him looking through an old photograph he'd brought from home, one she recognized from her first dinner at his house. Tell me about her, Maxwell said suddenly. Say about the Elizabeth you knew at Wellesley. I know how she was as my wife, but I never knew her as a friend. Patricia smiled, remembering. She was terrible at keeping plants alive. Had this sad little fern in her dorm room that she kept trying to save. But she could quote entire passages of Jane Austen from memory. As Patricia shared stories of the Elizabeth she'd known, she watched Maxwell's face soften. For the first time, they were truly sharing their memories of the woman who had, in different ways, shaped both their lives. Later that night, after Maxwell had finally been convinced to go home and rest, Patricia lay awake, one hand resting on her belly where their son grew stronger by the day. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since she'd agreed to this arrangement, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope, not just hope for survival or a fresh start, but hope for something more. Something neither she nor Maxwell had planned for when they made their deal in that diner months ago. As if sensing her thoughts, the baby kicked again, reminding her that some of life's greatest gifts come disguised as business arrangements. August 1984 brought stifling heat to Boston. Patricia had been moved from the hospital to Maxwell's mansion, where a medical team monitored her around the clock. Her room, once a guest suite, had been transformed into a comfortable hospital-like setting with all the necessary equipment. From her window, she could see the garden where Elizabeth had once tended roses. Maxwell had maintained it exactly as his late wife had designed it, though Patricia noticed the sad little fern from Elizabeth's college days now thrived in a corner, obviously well cared for. I had it brought from Wellesley after she died, Maxwell explained one evening, catching Patricia looking at it. Never could keep it alive, though, not until recently. What changed? Patricia asked, noting how healthy the plant looked now. Maxwell's eyes met hers. You mentioned how much she loved it. despite being terrible with plants. Made me realize I was keeping it wrong, trying to protect it too much instead of letting it grow naturally. The metaphor wasn't lost on Patricia. Since her revelations about Elizabeth, Maxwell had changed. The rigid businessman was still there, but he'd softened somehow, allowing himself to share memories and even laugh occasionally. Their evenings had fallen into a comfortable routine. After his workday, Maxwell would join Patricia for dinner in her room, sharing stories about their days. He told her about his latest real estate developments. She shared the progress she was making on the novel she'd started writing to pass the time. One particularly warm evening, as they finished their meal, Maxwell seemed unusually thoughtful. "The police finished their investigation into Montgomery's death," he said finally. "It was suicide. He left a full confession about Elizabeth's accident, the embezzlement, everything." Patricia set down her fork. "So it's really over." "Almost. There's something else you should know." Maxwell pulled an envelope from his jacket. This was in Montgomery's papers. "It's addressed to you, dated the day Elizabeth died." Patricia's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Inside was a letter written in Elizabeth's familiar handwriting. "Dearest Pat, I have the most wonderful news, but you must keep it secret for now. I'm pregnant. I'm telling Maxwell tonight, but first, I need your help. I know what Montgomery is doing to your father. Don't worry. I've told Maxwell about the medical bills, though not who they're for, and he's arranged everything. Your father will be taken care of, I promise. I've gathered evidence of Montgomery's crimes. Meet me tonight at our usual study spot. Together, we'll make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Love, Elizabeth." Patricia's vision blurred with tears. She knew. She was coming to help me that night. "That's why she was taking that road," Maxwell said quietly. "She was coming to meet you." If I had known, if I had been there earlier, then Montgomery might have arranged an accident for you too. Maxwell moved to sit on the edge of her bed, taking her hand. "Elizabeth made her choice to help you, just as you chose to keep fighting even after losing everything." Patricia looked down at their joined hands, then at her swollen belly. "I've been thinking about choices too, about our arrangement." "Patricia," Maxwell started, but she shook her head. "Please, let me finish. When we made this deal, I thought I was just giving you an heir in exchange for a fresh start. But this baby, he's not just a business transaction to me anymore, and I don't think he is to you either." Maxwell was quiet for a long moment. "No," he finally admitted. "He's not. I need to know." Patricia took a deep breath. "What happens after he's born really happens, not just what we agreed to on paper." Before Maxwell could answer, Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. "What's wrong?" Maxwell asked, alarmed. "Nothing. He's just very active tonight. Here." She guided Maxwell's hand to where the baby was kicking. They sat in silence, feeling their son's movements together. "Stay," Maxwell said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because of our arrangement. Stay because I can't imagine you not being here, both of you." Patricia's heart raced. "Maxwell, I know it's not what we planned. I know there's Elizabeth's memory to consider, and our complicated history, and 1,000 other reasons why this is a bad idea, but when I thought I might lose you both at the hospital—" He stopped, struggling with words in a way Patricia had never seen before. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Harrison entered, frowning at the monitors showing Patricia's elevated heart rate. "Is everything all right?" she asked, concerned. "Everything's fine," Patricia assured her, though her pulse was still racing. "We were just talking about the future." The doctor checked Patricia's vitals, made some notes, and gave Maxwell a pointed look. "Try not to excite my patient too much, Mr. Bradford. She needs rest." After the doctor left, an awkward silence fell between them. The moment had been broken, leaving too many things unsaid. "We should talk more tomorrow," Maxwell said finally, standing. "When we're both calmer." Patricia nodded, though her heart ached watching him walk to the door. He paused there, looking back at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Patricia, what I said, I meant it." Then he was gone, leaving Patricia alone with her thoughts, her hopes, and the steady movements of their son beneath her heart. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, Patricia found herself thinking about choices. Elizabeth's choice to help her choice to accept Maxwell's proposition, and now the choice they both faced about their future. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. September brought cooler weather to Boston, and with it, an unexpected calm. Patricia had been stable for weeks now. The danger of premature labor passed. Her room in Maxwell's mansion had become less medical and more personal, filled with books, her writing materials, and the novel she was close to finishing. Maxwell had taken to reading her drafts in the evenings, offering thoughtful feedback that surprised her with its insight. Tonight, though, he seemed distracted as he sat in his usual chair by her bed. "Patricia," he said finally, setting aside her manuscript, "there's something I need to show you." He helped her up carefully. She was nearly 8 months along now, and led her down the hallway to a door she'd never seen opened. Inside was a nursery, but not the formal designer space she'd expected. Instead, it was warm and personal, filled with hand-picked items that spoke of love rather than obligation. "I've been working on it myself," Maxwell admitted, watching her take in the details. "No designers, no decorators, just what I thought our son might like." Patricia touched a hand-carved wooden rocking horse, noting the care in its craftsmanship. "You made this?" "My father taught me woodworking before he lost everything in the crash of '29. It's the only thing I have left of him, this skill." Maxwell ran a hand along the horse's mane. "I want our son to have more than just money and property. I want him to have memories, traditions, love." Patricia turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. "Maxwell, let me finish," he said softly. "When we made our arrangement, I thought I was just securing an heir. But you've given me so much more than that. You've helped me remember who I was before I lost Elizabeth, before I buried myself in business deals and forgot how to really live." He took her hands in his. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choices, about our future, and I realize I don't want this to be just an arrangement anymore." Patricia's heart thundered in her chest. "What do you want it to be?" "A beginning," he whispered, "for all three of us." Before she could respond, a sharp pain seized her, different from anything she'd felt before. Her hands clutched her belly as water pooled at her feet. "Maxwell," she gasped, I think it's time." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Harrison was summoned, the medical team sprang into action, and the mansion's quiet was broken by the organized chaos of Patricia's labor. Through it all, Maxwell never left her side, holding her hand through each contraction, whispering encouragement. "I can't," Patricia cried during a particularly difficult moment. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Maxwell insisted, wiping her brow. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived losing everything. You kept fighting when the world was against you. You carried our son through all of it. You can do this." His words gave her strength, and when the final push came, Patricia found reserves of energy she didn't know she had. Then, suddenly, a new sound filled the room, the strong, healthy cry of their son. "He's perfect," Dr. Harrison announced, placing the swaddled baby in Patricia's arms, a beautiful, healthy boy. Patricia looked down at their son, overwhelmed by love for this tiny being who had brought her and Maxwell together. The baby had Maxwell's dark hair, but her green eyes, Elizabeth's eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, remembering the name they'd chosen together. "Welcome to the world, Thomas Bradford." Maxwell sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Patricia, looking at their son with wonder. "He's magnificent," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "just like his mother." Patricia looked up at him, surprised by the tender way he was watching her, not just Thomas. "Maxwell, I love you," he said simply. "I think I have for months now, but I was afraid to admit it, afraid I was betraying Elizabeth's memory, afraid of risking my heart again. But seeing you with our son, I know this is right. Elizabeth would want us to be happy." Tears streamed down Patricia's face. "I love you too," she confessed. "I've been so scared of these feelings, thinking I didn't deserve them after everything that happened." Maxwell leaned down, and for the first time, their lips met in a gentle, perfect kiss. It was a kiss of new beginnings, of hope, of love that had grown slowly and surely through all their shared pain and joy. When they parted, Thomas made a small sound between them, as if approving of his parents' connection. They both laughed softly, the sound full of joy and promise. "I have something else to show you," Maxwell said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out an old, worn photograph, Elizabeth on their wedding day. But instead of the pain Patricia expected to feel, she saw only peace in Maxwell's eyes as he looked at it. "I think it's time this went into Thomas's memory box, not hidden away, but preserved as part of his history, part of our history." Patricia understood. Elizabeth would always be part of their story, not as a shadow over their happiness, but as the friend and love who, in her own way, had brought them together. A year later, on a crisp autumn day, Patricia stood in the garden where Elizabeth's ferns still thrived. She watched Maxwell chase Thomas, now a toddler, around the rose bushes, their laughter echoing across the grounds. Her new novel, inspired by their story but transformed into a tale of hope and redemption, sat completed on her desk inside. The arrangement that had begun in desperation had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. A love story that honored the past while embracing the future, a family built on understanding and second chances. As the autumn leaves danced around them, Patricia smiled, touching the simple gold band on her finger, Maxwell's grandmother's ring, given to her in a quiet ceremony last spring. Their journey hadn't been conventional, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Together, they were writing a new chapter, one filled with love, family, and the kind of joy that can only come from choosing hope over fear, forgiveness over bitterness, and love over loneliness. Thomas toddled over to her on unsteady legs, Maxwell close behind. As she gathered their son in her arms and felt Maxwell's kiss on her temple, Patricia knew that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that find us when we're busy making other arrangements. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family, and don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.